So thank you everyone in the audience for your patience. We're running a little bit behind today. I'll just ask for a little bit more of your patience while I wait for DRC and staff colleagues to join me and do promotions to the panel for folks who are proposing the first project on our agenda today. So just please one moment.
Okay.
So Linda, I'm just promoting items, people for the first item, so hang tight.
Okay.
Okay, so Lisa and Kevin and James and Greg declined to be promoted to panelists. Are they mostly hanging out in the background today, or should I try to promote them again?
Like you, like region.
I would try and promote them again. This is Adam from Carmel.
Okay, great. Thanks, Adam.
And then
Yeah.
Steve, you.
Awesome. Okay, they should be joining. So with that, thank you everyone for your patience. This is the Development Review Committee meeting of December 7th. Just quickly, matter of order, during this declared state of emergency, this meeting is being conducted in accordance with California Government Code 54953E as authorized by resolution of the City Council. You can contact the city clerk at city.clerk@mountainview.gov to obtain a copy of the applicable resolution. All members of the DRC and staff are participating by video conference with no physical meeting location. Members of the public who are here today are going to be able to comment on each item. And we did receive some written correspondence, which I'll touch on at the point at which we're discussing each project. But if you're here today and interested in providing public comment, we'll provide that opportunity with each item respectively. If you're participating through the Zoom interface, you'll be able to use the raise hand function to indicate that you would like to provide some feedback. If you're calling in, you can dial *9. And I will call on folks individually, and if you're participating by phone, we'll use the last digits of your phone number, and *6 will allow you to unmute yourself. Quickly with a roll call, I'm Deputy Zoning Administrator Rebecca Shapiro. I'm joined today on the DRC by Linda Pancini, who's our consulting architect. We have 2 items, as I noted. For each item today, we'll welcome hopefully concise presentation from the development teams for the projects, followed by an opportunity for members of the public who are here today to share any feedback they have on the site or building design, and then bring it back to the group to have conversations about the project designs with each of the applicant teams. So with that, our first item is a development of a 7-story, 366 unit apartment project at 320 Loeb. And I welcome a presentation on where the project is today. This is returning for second and final DRC recommendations.
I'll go ahead and share. Yeah.
Thanks, Kevin. Thank you to the Design Review Committee for your time today. My name is Lisa Fife with Carmel Partners, and I'm joined by Adam and Greg from our office, as well as Kevin from PyTalk and Daniel and James from the Gazzardo Partnership. We are here today to present the 320 Logue project to the DRC committee for the second time. Next slide. As a brief reminder, the 320 Logue project is located within the East Westman Precise Plan, right adjacent to the VTA rail, and is in the vicinity of the Google Westman Precise Plan project. Next slide. As a brief agenda for today, we're going to briefly introduce the project, go over a few items that we heard from our first DRC hearing, and then we will present the updates to the site and building design in response to that feedback. Next slide. As a reminder, the project team, the developers, Carmel Partners, and we're joined by our architect, PyTalk, and landscape architect, the Gazzardo Partnership, and Kathy Thibodeau is our community liaison for the project. Next slide. A brief reminder, the site is a 2.14 acre site. We are proposing a project of an FAR of 3.5, which is 366 units, a mix of studio 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. There are 55 on-site affordable units. As Rebecca mentioned, the proposed project is 7 stories over 3 levels of subterranean parking that include 412 parking stalls and 4 to 12 bike parking stalls. Next slide. Coming out of our first DRC hearing, we got some feedback on our site design, the building base, the corners of and the Logue facade. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our design team, Daniel and Kevin, to touch upon our progress in response to these comments.
Great, thanks, Lisa. My name's Daniel with the Gazzardo Partnership, landscape architect, along with my colleague James. So just to give a brief summary about the site plan, I think we're fairly familiar with it, but we have a mix of different circulation around the site. We have an asphalt multi-use path. We have concrete, colored concrete walkways, also accent paving plazas, turf block to soften the ground plane, and a variety of small plazas and seating opportunities. And in terms of planting and trees, on site now there are 41 existing trees, and after a analysis of all the trees, we concluded due to their location and health, we could save 3 of those trees, which are located at the bottom of the page along the VTA path. And the replacement requirement for new trees is 54 trees, and we are now actually planting 98 new trees, so we're almost doubling the replacement ratio required. And in terms of tree canopy, the existing canopy is about 24%, and at full growth, our new tree canopy will be slightly over 30%, so we're exceeding the canopy as well. And next slide, please. So one of the areas that was of discussion last round was this vehicular drive. So we're zooming in here and discussing some of the improvements that we made. If you recall, it's broken down into 3 sort of zones. On the far right is the everyday vehicular traffic from residents where there's a drop off and where they can enter the garage. And then to the left of that, in the center area, divided by a rolled curb transition, is the loading and trash staging area. This area is differentiated in the paving by reversing the color of the bands to help differentiate it. And to soften this area more, working with the architects, we were able to add a small notch in the building and add a planter there to soften that part of the building facade with more planting. And then moving to the left is the third portion of the vehicular area. This is just for fire trucks and EVA zone. And It is divided by decorative removable bollards. So it would pretty much be a pedestrian plaza space. And we've added turf block bands to soften the ground plane. There's a number of bike racks and a bike repair station and a variety of different benches around the plaza for seating opportunities. We added more planting along the facade of the building by the bike storage area to soften this space. And then one of the comments from last round was creating more of a gateway experience. So we've added several columns here as people enter from the VTA path and the station. These columns will serve as a gateway and also a signage and wayfinding element for pedestrian and bike traffic. There's also a matching signage column at the entry of the drive off of Loeb. Next slide, please. A few other comments just wanted to touch on in terms of screening the utilities on Loeb. We are a fan of using planting to do that instead of a built structure, a fence of some sort. So here's some planting options that do a great job of screening utilities, and the majority of these are native plants. And there was also a question last round about the screen along the western property line at the VTA tracks. So this little detail elaborates on that. It would be a 6 feet tall CMU block wall. And in terms of color and finish, we're looking to the building facade for inspiration to match the brick color and pattern in that wall to really have a cohesive material palette. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Daniel. So we're happy to be here and present some of the updates that we've made since the last meeting. 1 second. There, okay. So I'll start here with, this is our early design process. We've been very open, kind of sharing how we think about design and what kind of ideas we thought would work really well that are fit to this site in particular. And so this is just a reminder of where we were when we first started and the kind of iterative process that we've had with planning on developing the language for this building. And so the first few slides just show those initial ideas and concepts. I won't spend too much time because these were presented before, but it just shows how we had this iterative process of improving the base and roof line of the building and articulation. And in each of these steps, I mean, I think that refinement was, it was a very kind of informative and collaborative process. And I think when we got the last round of comments, I'm going to hit on, you know, the kind of main ones, the main things we heard, which was making the roof line a bit more continuous where we could. So, and I can show it on the larger renderings, you'll see it, but just having more kind of a linear connection across where we could extend trellises, cutting back parapets over balconies and kind of helping reduce bulk, but then also streamlining that roof line. Reducing the heaviness of the building at the building corners by maybe eroding them, looking at the way the panels are expressed, looking at our window openings, having a more cohesive base. So especially connecting along the west side, facing the VTA tracks, it was a little bit too broken up for this group. And so we found ways of connecting it, making it stronger, and then enhancing the screening of those on-grade patios. And so those are some of the main comments we heard. I think James, and we worked with James and Daniel, obviously on the improvements of making the drive aisle more cohesive, both in plan, but then also improving that facade. And we relocated a service door, I think also to help improve that facade. So that was the other response that was in his kind of integrated with his solution. So I'll start here by just kind of mentioning that we also provided a materials board, and in our submission went through much more in detail, both in the elevations and providing this board highlighting the different materials and where those are provided. And we can come back to this at any point. I'd be happy to discuss this, but I think the renderings have much more clarity. I think that they were a little washed out last time, and I think so some of these were redone with some showing the design intent with the brick and siding and different accent materials that we're talking about, and so we improved these. I think the contrast was just a little bit off in the last one, so this provides a better idea what that design intent is. And then same thing for this ground level view. And then we walk around. This is our entry from the VTA station side, and it shows a little bit more planting along where we have the bike room, but again, just some improvements to the materials and textures. And you can see how those paving patterns and wall materials and seating, how they all integrate. And we have more planting at the base here. And then some of the bigger moves in kind of response to the comments before we extended that roof line across here and also here. That was a good suggestion. It helped kind of reduce the bulk of those corners. We also show the panel pattern more clearly of it being broken up, but also eroded those corners, studying both the window groupings, both the vertical bands, but also the corners are more opened up, and then also cutting back that parapet over the balconies on these corners, making the corners less bulky. And we felt that really helped streamline things. That kind of covers this one. And then you come around to this side, same thing here, we extended this trellis across. It helps feel more linear, more connected, integrated. And then you start to see the integration of the base as well. I think the next slide actually shows it more clearly, but then this also shows the corners have also been improved on this one as well. This is a close-up view. We talked about it at length. The grading has been corrected. I think there was some ramping and some strange pathway grades, and so that was corrected. We're starting to show the wall that Daniel alluded to on the far left. You see the screening between the units with a vertical panel that helps provide some more privacy, as well as the planting to help provide more privacy for those units, but then they still feel connected. And then the big move was really introducing that lintel across the top to help integrate the base. This was a little bit too fragmented before for this group, and we felt like this was a good suggestion of bringing this lintel across, strengthening this base, and then changing the railing a little bit so it has a solid panel here, providing some privacy for those units, but also delineating the kind of what's above it is more open and airy, and what's kind of at that datum is stronger. And this helps meet our open space requirements by projecting, but it's also a little different. I'm going to walk around more. So this side hasn't changed too much. I think just some improvements with the planting and pathway happened before, and then it shows the wall, the idea for the wall along the right side. This view shows some windows added to the corner where near the kitchen to help reduce the amount of blank wall. This is the kitchen back here. We have our panel joints. We opened up this corner more, and then we cut this parapet back. And that was also helped reduce the bulk of that bookend. Another comment was just kind of understanding how we could refine our sawtooth. This is our Logue facade facing Logue. And what we did was we brought this accent panel color up into the soffit and are studying and we looked at the expression of the column and the railings to kind of help really articulate it. And I think it's the devils in the details. We're going to work on this more with our structural engineer and waterproofing consultant and all that as we develop this more, get into like the construction documentation, but feel like that there's some really great detailing opportunities there. And this is walking around, you can see the sawtooth. And we also, I forgot to mention, we improved, we had a comment that the planting along the roof line seemed like a little bit much. It was kind of overly optimistic, I think, so we cut back on that. And then this is back on the Logue side at our main entry, showing again those improvements to the corner and the other ones we've mentioned. So with that, I will say thank you, and we value your feedback. I think it's been a great process up until this point. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin and Lisa and James. So I'm going to turn my attention to folks in our audience today. If anyone here would like to provide any feedback to the DRC and the applicant connected to the site or architectural design, please raise your hand now. Reminder, *9 if you're participating by phone. Okay, no hands are currently raised. So I'll just bring it back to the panel. Just, for everyone's information, city staff did receive 2 comment letters for this project. I just want to briefly mention for everyone's information for the record. The first email letter actually sort of was pertinent to both projects on today's agenda and sought to register objections to removal of mature heritage trees by the projects for a variety of health, biodiversity, and sustainability objectives. The second comment specific to this particular project noted a couple things that were really targeted to making it just super uber convenient for walking and biking through design in order to create healthier, safer cities and meet climate goals. So there were a couple specific recommendations that this person recommended. First was for bicycle parking rooms in the project to have doors that lead directly outside for convenience, but also to limit some of the incompatibilities that can exist between sort of more generally used circulation areas and bicycling, particularly during inclement weather, where mud, dirt, and other things get tracked into buildings from bikers. Second would be focus on the north side of the building, where the recommendation was to incorporate direct access from the ground level patios to the sidewalk in the north setback area. And I think we'll touch on some of those in our DRC discussion today. So, first, I think picking up where Kevin left off, I would definitely agree that we've had some very good conversations, both at a staff and a DRC level on this project. And one of the things that we've been remarking on is really how useful the design studies and design strategy diagrams that you've incorporated in your plan set have been, not just in sort of illustrating your thinking, but helping us sort of more broadly understand what the goals are from a design standpoint in this project, and it makes it easier for us to do our jobs. So I'd like to, I think I talked about this the last time around, but I want to again thank you for being so open with those materials. There are a few things that we'd like to touch on the site plan that are really fairly targeted. And I'm gonna try to quickly run through those items. First, just in regards to the above ground equipment screening that James touched on. Yeah, I'd say that the concept plants seem appropriate. I've certainly seen similar plants used in other projects, and I think particularly once they grow in, they can be effective. A final recommendation again would just be that you work closely with staff on fine tuning sort of more the precise placement of utilities to really make sure that you're allowing adequate space for landscape screening when accounting for the various sort of buffer and access requirements to that above ground equipment. The devil's really in the details there. And so a general condition to that effect would be beneficial overall. I also want to echo something that you may have already heard from staff, which is to continue to work on the short-term bike parking rack locations around the site, particularly because you are implementing the East Wisconsin Precise Plans, public multi-use path along the VTA light rail tracks. That sort of means, I think, slightly different things as far as the locations that we tend to want to see bike racks, just because we're not just thinking about building visitors who are going to want to be accessing the the main entries, but other amenity locations and access points around the site. So staff had indicated that sort of one of the locations that they were looking at was around the northwest corner where the pathways intersect out there. Coincidentally, I think rejiggering some of those bike rack locations could yield some easy opportunities to consider direct outside access to the bike rooms. I would say try to get at least one of the bike rooms to have that access. I know there are a lot of pros and cons to doing that. They can be security risks, but I know particularly in our larger residential projects in our downtown, one of the things that residents have really remarked on are the bike rooms that have direct exterior access for their convenience. So would recommend that you continue to work on that. There are two other minor things that I'd like to touch on. The first is, with apologies, I didn't have a chance to double check the landscape plans, but from the renderings, you have a sort of a continuation of a wall along the northerly property line that's shown, which appeared to extend kind of forward of the building. It was very prominent in views of the site when sort of looking kind of southwest from Logue Ave, and would want to see you look at either stepping down that wall or pulling it back from the property line. Obviously, we want sort of some sort of good neighbor condition there, and similarly something that helps reduce views of that transformer area, but it kind of had more prominence than the building itself, which we've generally really liked in the past, the building that is. That said, if it's possible to get some slightly taller plants in that near planting area you have on the building side, but just do a little bit of view interruption. I'm just going to just quickly annotate the area I'm talking about. Right around there. So you see more sort of taller landscaping than the area leading to the transformer room. I think there's some minor improvements you could make there. So I think the one last thing that I would recommend, and Linda, I apologize, I don't think we've talked about this one before, but I think the concept for the this sort of southerly wow, I don't know where southerly came from, but the southerly area has come along quite a way from the earliest days on this project, and is looking sort of substantially improved from early concepts. I'd like to encourage you to really evaluate what the sort of programmatic aspects of the service use of this middle portion is, and if you think it will be low enough to just consider a little bit more how this area sort of maybe in a more modular way could add sort of additional amenities to the more people focused space, so we can sort of bleed more people and less vehicle use into this area, to the extent that you're not going to be seeing moving vans and trash trucks there all the time. It might be something that you want to think about just from like maybe sort of it's part of your operations and programming side of things, rather than sort of the like physical improvements that are there on a more permanent basis. But I think it would be worth seeing if there's ways to get sort of maybe more than a third of this space that's really more people focused. And I think that was it on the site. To be absolutely honest, this is one of those projects where today we're really just on the design side have much more targeted and detailed final recommendations. There's, I think, nothing really big that we're going to be recommending on the building design, and that it is a long-winded way of saying that overall we were very pleased with the revisions that you've made to the project design since the last DRC review. So I guess, could you bring up a west elevation view? So I think most of the more important things we wanted to chat about with you today are west elevation focused. Yeah. Linda, do you want to start with stoops, or do you want to start with windows? What do you think?
I'm sorry.
What do you think, stoops or windows as a starting point?
Oh, well, let's start with stoops. I think that's a pretty straightforward, easy one. I think we had wanted to be sure that the stoops were more emphasized, and I think that one of the things we thought of that it might be just a very simple solution was to introduce some color into that back wall of those little courtyards, and that would just bring some more attention to that and make it pop a little bit. Right now it's recessed, but there isn't a real differentiation. I think that the using that soffit material in there is a great idea, and maybe there's a way to bring some of that color or a different accent color down onto that wall. That was one of the things we thought would emphasize those a little bit more.
Yeah, I'll just add that definitely glad to hear that ramping thing that we noticed last time was an error and easily resolved. It looks much better for that change. I think one other thing to potentially study with what Linda just talked on as far as adding some color to pop the stoop conditions a little bit more is considering whether you do want to do something different with that stoop railing. Whether that's something like a wall that picks up on like the brick character you have elsewhere in the project, or or something else that just, that adds up. I know your concept was really trying to be thoughtful about the landscape design. I think that will really look will end up looking pretty good along this frontage. I think the railing or a wall that design there could also really add to the steep condition. Linda, I forgot that I'd noticed, because we were thinking more macro in on the west elevation. What are your thoughts on the solid metal panel change on the second floor balcony?
Well, in looking at it, it feels a little heavy. And I think that it's understandable in terms of trying to change that massing feeling. But we were thinking it might be better if it's a little lighter feeling than that heavy with that wall coming up that far. So if you could maybe take a look at that. It's understandable how you're trying to differentiate it from the balcony above, where it's more of a, just a metal facade facing on those balconies, but it felt a little heavy.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of taking a look at that and see if that could be dealt with a little differently. We like the fact that you added that the continuation of the edge of the the base. I'm going to call it the base of the building there.
Yeah, and just to give it, I think it's probably not a color thing. Maybe it might be worth at that second floor railing, creating just a little bit of permeability in that solid panel through some sort of patterning. Maybe that's something you play with as far as looking at the ground floor stoops as well, like relate the two. But yeah, it's for me, it's a little bit of a heavy issue, but also it just feels really out of character with the rest of the design. We don't kind of have that sort of solid paneling elsewhere in kind of a railing condition that I can remember. So lightening it a little bit, I think, would be prudent as well. Could you go to the kind of full bleed 3D view that you had, I think, on the prior sheet? Yeah, so one of the other things that caught our eye, just in this view in particular, in general, we found the changes to the corners to be a notable improvement from what we had last seen, and actually really appreciated seeing the various options that you'd studied. I know you had gone over those with staff, but it was also useful for DRC to see those as well. The right-hand side, so that's the southwest corner of the project. One of the things that did catch our eye was the proportions on those sort of vertical slots that you have there. And in particular, those two narrower ones, really, there's something that felt just a little bit poorly proportioned. One potential solution that occurred to us was, and I realized that you have window widths that are connected to what the interior of the unit is doing, but one thought would be studying something like widening that right hand stack of windows, maybe to be consistent with the width of the living room windows on the left hand side of the three stacks, but just the proportion of the windows and sort of window area to solid wall there just seemed a little bit off, particularly in the angular views of the facade.
Yeah, I think my initial thought was if it just had 2 slots instead of 3, like the other end does, but understanding, floor plan wise, that wouldn't work at this corner. So I think it's just a matter of really looking at the at the width of those two more slender slots, whether making the one that's closer to the corner a little wider. Just take a look at that, see what you might be able to do.
The one thing I'll add on the recommendations we had on the entry stoops to the west elevation is that we, would recommend that you carry those through the north elevation, where you also have ground floor residential units that have, to the extent that the condition overlaps. So looking at some pop in the base, like we're talking about on the west. And I will say, I know that probably part of the reason for not having the direct access to the ground level unit patios along the north was trying to maximize landscaping. Because I know we spoke a lot with staff about ways to do that, but I would echo and support the public comment that we received about providing access paths if you can, without losing trees to those ground level patios along the north elevation. Perhaps they could be a little bit more informal if needed to preserve the trees, but in these more urbanizing areas of the city, we have more permeable sites. So, traditionally when we've looked at buildings that have ground floor units, it's often been the case that they are oriented towards a public frontage. And we're seeing more and more public and semi-public frontages on non-public streets. So I think it's prudent to carry our sort of direct unit access objectives around to these other stoop locations or ground level patio locations. It ends up being very convenient, I think, for both the residents and visitors. The other area,
I think,
go ahead.
no, I was just going to comment on, while we were kind of on the window subject, that the idea of having black frames on these corners and then white frames in other parts of those connecting elements, I think that's going to help define the massing on this building, and I think it's a great idea. So just wanted to compliment you on that design feature.
Agreed. I want to just briefly touch on the south elevation, and it seems I think you glossed over some of the changes there, and some of them seem really small. And I think we tend to look at whole facades, and you kind of can lose sight of the details. But someone walking along the building, I think, will appreciate that small planter nook that you were able to create. Losing one utility door, like those are sort of incremental changes that make a difference. Maybe not when you're looking at the building from across the street, but certainly make a difference when you're walking along it. So do want to compliment you on those changes. This utility area is still though part of a pretty public interface with the site. You're carrying the brick through as far as your design strategy. So kind of in keeping with both prominent visibility and sort of the upgraded base materials that you're employing here, I'd like you to look at how you can design gates and doors and other things that are outward facing to these utility areas and garage entries in a way that feels like they're architecturally additive and not just sort of utilitarian. They obviously need to be durable and appropriate to the requirements of the rooms that they are associated with, but we want to make sure that they are complementary to the high level architectural design of the walls around them. That also applies, I think, to the fencing of the transformer enclosure that faces the multi-use path. Where this might actually be another area where sort of the design that you incorporate into the balconies and or stoop railings could perhaps carry through in some form to that enclosure. I think the last few things that we wanted to chat with you about today were a little bit more detailed. And it's going to be a combination of design recommendation and information that we want to make sure is incorporated or wasn't entirely clear to us from our review of the plans. So I guess the first question is the balcony fascia. Obviously, the balconies are one of the key components of the building design, but we weren't able to discern exactly what the balcony fascia material is proposed to be. Didn't see a call out on the detailed views or elevations.
It's we're wrapping I believe it's a hardy panel and be painted, but it'll be painted to basically express that edge, because I think what we're proposing is wood balconies, but I think we want that to feel finished and integrated with the railing. So we're going to put a finished panel, and wrap the edges and have it be the same color as the railing materials.
Okay, so sorry, the fascia will match the railing materials or the soffit materials, soffit and decking materials.
It would match the railing material. It's a painted, I believe it may be slightly more clear here. I don't.
13, okay, let me look. 12.
Graphically, I mean, that's what we're showing, that it's painted to kind of match the railing material.
Okay. Yeah, so it was kind of interesting. So that these detailed views and the elevations sort of showed it in a lighter color, which on zooming in you can see kind of matches the railing. But several of your 3D views give kind of more of a warmer tone.
Yeah, the color is not quite the same.
Yeah, to it, and to be honest, the warmer tone kind of really appealed to me, and I kind of like the idea of sort of, because the soffit and the decking have this wood material of that kind of pulling through the fascia, at least in regards to color. It needn't necessarily be the same material. Linda, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, in terms of the fascia of the deck, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, that I mean, I personally think it shouldn't match the wood. I think it should be, more related to the railing itself. I think that what would be helpful for staff as you move forward would be to really provide a detail of that, because just looking at the way it's rendered, it almost looks like it's a wide flange of steel. So
It's meant to kind of look like that, but it's finished. It's not exposed wood. So the intent is to make it look finished.
Yeah. So I think the details on that will be important for staff to review, because in the renderings, it does look like it's quite finished, but it has a fair amount of detail to it. If I'm expressing that correctly, it looks like it's got, some detailing that reflects where the railing corners are coming down and the posts of that.
Yeah, I'd agree. So this is definitely one of those where a clear detail.
It's a detail thing, yeah.
Material is necessary. I guess I would also
Right.
like to see, have you work with staff and take a closer look at, how the how that sort of facade level appearance of the building differs with, what you just described as the proposal in regards to the fascia color. It didn't, there were many renderings that felt like they were a warmer tone than what you
Mhm.
described, and maybe it's just, it's a computer screen issue. But when you zoomed in, it looked like the railings were fairly silvery, and I just want to make sure that we still have a warm color that helps these balconies, continue to pop.
Yeah, I think
We'll look at
it's a
that.
matter of the detailing of it. I think the intent looks good to me. The question is, what is the detail really, and what is the color really? But that's something that can be reviewed with staff as you go along.
And then, I'll just add, because I finally looked even closer at the brick patterning that you have shown in the 3D renderings, and I think the way you're using differentiated patterning, I think you have at least 3 different conditions, really helps to create more interest and dynamic condition at the base that I think is going to be effective.
Yeah,
So do want to sort of lend our support to the approach that you've proposed there. The one other comment just on clear information in the plans is, I think most of your 3D views have indicated that this orangey metal panel system is going to have some sort of like smaller increment patterning to it, but there wasn't a very clear specification, so we couldn't really sort of tell, like, more precisely what that pattern was actually going to be in a sort of a real world example. So want to make sure that what we're seeing in the 3D renderings is something that's going to actually kind of be what you're
It's a metal shingle,
okay.
and it's on our.
Yeah, so the photo didn't appear. Yeah, I realized it was really small, like a shingle, and then in the manufacturer specifications, so it was hard to kind of like close the loop. I think the or similar connotation gives us, or notation gives us enough flexibility to make sure that you can actually get something from someone in your construction timing, because I know getting materials is still hard right now, supply chain issues, but the starting point is just like understanding or making sure that what you're specifying is consistent with the elevations and renderings. So we like that sort of smaller increment shingly detail. I think it's effective. We just want to make sure it carries through the other sheets. We have 3 final recommendations for you today that or maybe just 2, connect to windows. One, I think one of the things that we've been considering is that this is actually a pretty large building, and you've been very successful in creating smaller scale in what is a pretty big building. And so it could be that it's just you don't notice some of the fine grained details unless you really zoom in. But we understand from your material sheet that you're proposing a mix of white and black vinyl windows in the designs. That's correct, right?
Yes.
But when we were looking at like the elevations and 3D views, like we weren't actually really picking up the white windows very much. And like I said, it could just be just a scale thing when we're looking at like a facade view, but it like on some of the white walls where I'm presuming that there's actually maybe I should check myself. Are the white vinyl windows on the darker wall areas and the darker windows on the light colored walls? What's the
it kind of shows up, I think, in the 3D views, especially when you're close up. I mean, they're outlined, so you see they're kind of crisp, but they show up in mostly the middle sections, it's the corners. So it goes back to the original, the early diagrams. So in this early study, in terms of our site strategies, you know, I think this early sketch that shows, I make it bigger, shows how we thought of breaking up the building as these kind of there's this like kind of side corners facing the VTA, and then there's the Logue frontage. And so we think about it as these kind of bookends where it's like this kind of long facade, but then it's this whole frontage on Logue. And it goes back to that early study. So if I were to highlight it on a plan, it would be kind of, let's see, go to this plan, it might be more clear, but it would be kind of this frontage is the darker windows, and it's along the bases as well in some cases, but it's these corners really that get the darker windows. That's the
Okay.
key, and then the rest of it's white.
Okay, it's not based
That's-
on sort of.
Yeah,
material
that's
or-
what I thought, and that it was just rendering that didn't, pick it up that
Oh,
well.
it shows up. I mean, it's usually black. If it's like, if in this case here, it's black along these entries, but you see it's white above.
Yeah, I think it was more discernible in like these really zoomed views. It was just sort of when we looked out, it wasn't, we were like, oh, is that like that middle portion of this facade? Are those actually white windows? They look kind of like gray, like the color that's around them. So yeah,
So
like
these-
I said, it may just be, it's hard to review them, or hard to view legibly at a zoomed out scale, just given the size of the building. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
make sure if
That's what we were assuming, what you've
This
just drawn
is-
in place. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
that works.
Fine. Yeah.
The window details on sheet A8, the key thing that we wanted to recommend was just actually what you kind of touched on there, that we appreciate the recessed window condition on stucco here, but would recommend that it be slightly tighter. It seemed like that recessed window plane has like a 2-inch frame around it, and you seem to be using a sort of a foam wall exterior insulation or something. So we'd like to
Yes.
see that pulled tighter for a cleaner recess detail if at all possible. It seems also more true to what we were.
Yeah, that's on that detail 4.
Yeah.
Detail 4 on A8, that it's sort of like a frame around the frame. And we thought it would look better to have that, the foam, the plaster on that foam come straight back to the window. Hard to explain it, but
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, that one.
Come closer to the window, is that what I heard?
Yeah, so.
Right, so that it would just come straight back, similar to what it's going to look like on the thin brick. It comes, that return on that brick comes straight back, right? It doesn't have a jog in it.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly.
And then just our final recommendation is on the wood accents that you've called out, principally there in these ground level entry soffits and the balcony soffits, and decking, and maybe 1 or 2 other locations. The material board calls out a GLM or similar product, and we have some experience with at least one line of GLM products, and our experience and sort of our review of photos from the GLM site are that it doesn't really have as natural appearance as we would want, in particularly the locations where it's being used or proposed to be used closer to pedestrian level. So would like to see an alternate spec for that product. And I think that actually wraps up
Yeah, I think that.
our notes for you today. So unless you have any other final questions, I can wrap things up by just saying, I know you have a little bit of time before the CEQA document for your project is complete. So it's always great if you know, we can have as many of these recommendations addressed in the plans that go to council and EPC as possible. If you're pressed for time, I would focus on the items that are like more pedestrian focus and also clarifying information in the plans, because the entitlement set of plans is really our basis for subsequent building permit reviews. And so not having confusion about you know, specifications or details is really ideal. But you know, as I led at the top with, you know, this was a great second review because the things that we wanted to talk with you about were pretty targeted and focused, because you guys did a very good job of addressing our prior feedback. So again, just appreciate the work that you all have done and the sort of collaborative perspective that you've taken on this project review. So
Yeah, nice project.
Thank you both. We appreciate your time today and the feedback that we received.
So yeah, that wraps up item 2.1, and we will be moving on to item 2.2. So with everyone's patience, I'll have another series of promotions that I'll have to do. Thank you again, 320 Load team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Rebecca, I just had one question I forgot to ask you. It's a little after 3 o'clock now. Will we be finished by 4:30?
We should be, I hope,
Okay, that's fine. I just have
another obligation. No, I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Sophia, a quick question. I'm seeing an ST in the attendee list. Is that John?
Let's
You know?
see. John Wang is here with me in the same room. It could, I wonder if it could be Greg Chong, the owner.
I'm wondering if it's Greg too.
No, he's separately listed. I just wanted to make
Okay.
sure that John wasn't a separate listing. There was an ST. ST, you are permitted to talk. Hello. Should you be promoted?
No, ST is Sharon. I'm just from the public.
Okay, thank you for clarifying it.
Thank you.
One of the confusions of virtual meetings. Thank you. Okay, I think I have everyone promoted then. So moving right
Oops.
along. Item 3.2 on our agenda today is a first review by DRC of a proposed 5-story 32-unit condominium, residential condominium development at 918 Rich Avenue. With that very, very brief introduction, I will turn it over to the development team for a brief presentation, introducing us to the project and sort of what you're trying to accomplish here, and then we'll open it up to public comment.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. I'm gonna just go ahead and start the slides. I'm going to go ahead and keep it in this view. We thought it would be helpful just to go over where we are in the process relative to big picture. When we first turned the project in middle of last year, we wanted to first get high-level comments from staff and kind of understand what big issues might be to address before taking the project and getting community feedback. So once we did that and collected staff information and the first round of comments and started to make revisions to address those issues, that's when we felt like the right time to bring the project to the community would be, which was in January and February earlier this year. Based on the community feedback and staff feedback, we proceeded to make changes to the project, trying to address concerns. And subsequently, basically, here we are now after a few iterations. And what we hope to do is to get your feedback today. We've received staff comments on the latest submittal. And then what we plan to do in January of next year is to have our second community meeting, taking in all the collective feedback and then comprehensively addressing the things we would need to resubmit to staff by end of February. So high level, I would like to just run through kind of a little bit of the project history. I do have other project team members here with me today who can address more detailed questions about landscape design. We also have our property owner, Greg Shong, here, who can answer any other questions about property as well. But basically, when we first submitted the project last year, it was always our interest to use this stepped massing concept to try to mitigate the bulk and the height of the project from the adjacent single family and apartment buildings and concentrate the taller massing towards the commercial and higher density properties on the west. So we thought this was also a great opportunity to incorporate more outdoor open space for the residents. And that really is what drove our desire to explore this partial fifth floor to begin with, because we felt that that would give the greatest opportunity to make the building feel smaller on the sides of the property that were more sensitive. With the feedback that we got from community and from staff, which included exploring ways to improve the landscape buffer around the perimeter, looking at ways to reduce the bulk. We did understand, these are just a high-level summary of the comments and concerns we did hear from the community. We did understand they were disappointed over the fifth story. They had concerns over traffic and parking. They asked us to look at the main stair core and how much light and visibility would be coming from that core. They were concerned about noise and privacy from the terraces. Our Hollingsworth neighbors were concerned about the height and the massing of the building facing their properties and encouraged us to look at the driveway entrance more carefully because they thought it was a little bleak. So we did go through a number of iterations and changes. We actually did take this original 5-story concept and try to make it a 4-story building, which we did. And actually it was one of the subsequent resubmittals where we took the 3 units that we had on the 5th floor and reworked the plans to consolidate everything onto a 5th floor. We did receive after that some clarification that because there was a inconsistency between how the zoning ordinance calculated the maximum density for this site as opposed to what the general plan had, that our base density was actually higher than we thought, maximum density. And as a result, we were required to provide 4 below market rate units. Previously, the project was proposing to provide 3 below market rate units. So because of this, in order to make the project feasible financially for the property owner, we had to offset that by adding more market rate units. So as a result, we went from a 29 unit project with 3 below market rate units to a 32 unit project with 4 below market rate units, which meant that we had to put a partial 5th floor back on the project. Taking this into account and understanding the sensitivity around the 5th floor, and also taking in a lot of very helpful feedback from staff, where we talked with them a number of times about the details and the materials palette of the project that was previously proposed. We worked to simplify and minimize the palette of the building, reduce the number of colors and materials that we had originally proposed, and try to place them in a manner that really more emphasized the lower 3-story base. And then we felt that using lighter colors as we moved up would help the building feel like it was receding a bit more and make the 5th floor feel a little bit less pronounced. We were encouraged to study the roof line of the stair tower and elevator core, and had some good suggestions, Rebecca, in talking with you. But ultimately what we felt like was a potentially appropriate response was to try to step the roof of the stair and elevator tower. And we also looked at simplifying and minimizing the openings and windows that we had on the stair tower, which before there was a lot more glazing, and it called a lot more attention to itself. And we understood that the neighbors had concerns about potential glow and light and views from that. So we tried to really pare that down. We also addressed some staff comments about using some detailing to emphasize the building entrance a bit more. The site couldn't be any more complicated. We have a flag lot that has a tricky configuration to work with. We have a Los Altos storm drain easement that runs all the way down the length of the driveway and then turns across the site at the end of the panhandle. So everything that we did from where the building built structures could be located to where the ramp could start and stop were all dictated by these constraints. And we also had to work closely with fire to get this ramp to the 1 level of below grade parking to work such that they could pull their fire truck up to the building, to the proximity that they required, which is why the driveway changed from a straight on access to this angular configuration. We felt that actually afforded us some opportunity where in earlier designs, we had the building entrance tucked into this corner, and we received staff comments that the entrance felt too tucked away. So we felt that in combination with what we technically had to achieve, we were able to relocate the building entrance to what we felt like was a more prominent position and better view line from the site entrance. We also wanted to really keep in mind comments that we got from the neighbors. We detailed the guardrails at each of the private balconies to be taller. The perforated metal goes to 3'6" above the floor of the balcony, and then we added a foot of horizontal slats to the top of that to bring the top of the guardrails to 4'6", so that it still afforded some hints of views and light for the residents when looking out from inside, but also raised that that line that could help mitigate and cut off views towards the exterior. We did go around and studied window sizes a little more closely, and they actually have been reduced from the sizes that were originally proposed. Window sills were brought up. The placement of the horizontal shading devices were brought down, all to kind of play with the scale of the elements a little bit more. We incorporated more trellises at the outdoor balconies. And we also stepped more of the mass on the west side and on the south side of the building, facing Hollingsworth, so that we felt like we really did try to make a lot of the improvements that we were asked to. This is just an overall view of the landscape plan, which you hopefully did see in the packet of drawings. But here, this entry view, we wanted to really emphasize that they're mainly using native plant materials and layered them in a manner which we think would create a much nicer entrance. We have an entry plaza where we would really like to incorporate opportunities for informal play. We have bench seating, oversized chess and checkers, and try to make it an inviting space for kind of multi-generational play area. Planters at the ground level and around the building were strategically placed and raised in some areas to really create a nice green buffer for the property edges, and provided more opportunities for increased tree planting around the perimeter, so that would provide a little more privacy between the property and adjoining residents. And for the 5th floor roof terrace, we really felt it important to maintain, especially after COVID times, understanding how important open space is for people, to maintain a nice open area that residents could share and use, but knowing that this was one of the areas that residents were quite concerned about in terms of privacy and noise. We looked to really focus the activity and the attention towards the middle of the space. We increased the depth and height of planters around the edge. That allows for a denser amount of planting and some trees. We incorporated a glass windscreen, not only for safety, so that if anybody were to try to climb on top of the planters, that this is a legal and safe railing height, but that also, again, lends to some added screening and privacy. And we do feel like, because these are single family residences, that we're not trying to promote a party atmosphere, just a very nice open space that people can go out and use and be with their families and have a chance to get some fresh air. So we wanted to really take into account all of the feedback that we heard from staff and the community, and are looking forward to just hearing for the first time what your input for us is. So I appreciate everything. Hopefully that kept it short and sweet, and welcome any of your comments. I can put it on perhaps this view, if this is a helpful one. Rebecca, you can let me know.
Yeah, I would say maybe to start with, if you could put up the landscape site plan. But
Sure.
before we jump into questions and feedback from the DRC, I will look to our audience today and ask folks who are there to raise their hands if you wish to provide any comments. So first up is Bruce England. Bruce, you should be able to speak.
Yes, I think so. Thanks, Rebecca. I'm Bruce England, speaking today for Mountain View Coalition for Sustainable Planning. This looks like a worthy project. It adds housing, which we very much need, and it's actually good to see the additional units in the new proposal. A couple of comments. City Council just last night reviewed a project, an affordable housing project at 1265 Montecito. And one of the things that they liked and members of the community liked were the natural elements in the building materials and in the exterior features, the public facing and open space areas. I suppose that if you wanted this project to be the least imposing on people in the adjacent areas, that using as many natural materials as possible would be good. And maybe you're already thinking about that, but I just thought I would mention it. And then Rebecca, you might advise that I bring this up at another time, and I welcome any advice you have on doing this. But from the community, there was an ask about consideration for some kind of a paseo or something like that as part of the project through Public Works to connect Rich Avenue over to El Monte, because there really isn't a good connection point there. I know things are super tight and maybe this is not at all feasible and maybe this is not the right place to bring it up, but I wanted to at least mention it so it would be on your radar. And with that, I'm done.
Thank you, Bruce. Next up is Kathy with a K. Kathy, you should be able to speak now.
Hi, I am first really pleased to see the solar panels on the rooftop. Thank you for that. And in line with that, both for the last project that was reviewed and now, I'm curious that since the state is moving toward more electric vehicle promotion, are there plans for electric vehicle charging stations in the parking garage? Thank you.
Hi, Kathy. Yes. So the plan would be to have all the parking in the underground parking garage for the residents be EV ready. Yes. So that is in the plans.
And I'll just add, the city has a green building code and REACH code standards. There'll be new codes that go into effect January 1st. And the city in general has been ahead of the curve as far as the state requirements are, and typically includes a mix of EV readiness and actual chargers installed. So there will be EV charging in the project. I don't have the details in my head of the current building code requirements, but that is and will be part of the project. Thank you for the question, Kathy. Next up, and the last hand I'm seeing raised is Carlos Valdez. Carlos, you should be able to speak. Okay, I see additional hands. So yeah, thank you. Anyone else in the audience who would like to comment on, please raise your hand now. But Carlos, you're good to go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Development Review Committee members. My name is Carlos Valdez. I am a field representative for Carpenters Local Union 405. I'm going to talk about the importance for labor standards for our community. What is labor standards, you may ask? The stands for healthcare, apprenticeship, and livable wages. Healthcare, speaking about healthcare, do you know that nearly 50% of California construction workers rely on some form of public assistance? Also, that 1 out of 4 construction workers in California lack health insurance. That is 2.5 the rate for all California workers. When it comes to apprenticeship, construction apprenticeship programs are proven escalators to the middle class, training tens of thousands of
Oh, we lost Carlos. So next up will be ST. You should be able to speak.
Yes, I had a few questions. So with the addition of 3 more units, is there going to be more parking underground?
Yes, we did increase the number of parking spaces underground for the residents to accommodate the added units. We're planning to incorporate parking lifts partially in the basement to accommodate additional spaces.
Okay, and then on slide 5, you had the trees like growing up to the 5th floor. How many years, or I don't know what type of trees those are, how many years do you expect that to take?
Perhaps I could ask our landscape architect to help with that technical question.
That's a great question. Brian Glick, landscape architect. That's a tricky one. There are studies that show, depending on sun, water, fertilizer, all the other great environmental factors and great care, there can be a big variety. Some of the trees that we have selected, there are a few slow growers. The rest of them are actually moderate rate growers. So we're talking about in the 10 to 15 year range, which is something that's modeled in the canopy plan that we studied for the city.
Okay, thank you. And then two more questions. For to get the additional units, I assume the square footage was all added to the 5th floor. It's the base size of the project did not increase. Is that correct?
The 4th and 5th floor saw some modifications, but the one thing I'll add that on top of that is that this project is proposing a state density bonus, and as proposed is under the maximum that would be allowed pursuant to the state density bonus law. Cynthia, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you guys are not actually maxing out what's permitted for the project.
That's correct. Yes, we're not maxing out the number of units that we could have, and we're not maxing out the square footage.
Okay, thank you. And then the first caller had mentioned like a connection to El Monte. How would that be handled? Because I know with the senior building going up, there's probably going to be a lot more traffic coming out on El Monte. And that way, I don't know who or what body would okay, like a pathway through to the church to get to El Monte or through the senior center, the proposed senior center. I'm not sure.
The short answer to that question and to Bruce's comment is it's not something that would be addressed through this committee. I think Bruce indicated that he had directed the comment already to our public works staff, who are heavily involved in anything regarding public access and sort of public improvements, even when they go through private properties. Realistically, I think there would be exactly the challenge that you noted as far as identifying any feasible connection through the other half of that block between Rich and El Monte. So practically, it may be infeasible, but that's something that that staff would be looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think we have D. Lund. You should be able to speak.
Hi, this is Deborah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I am your happy neighbor on Hollingsworth that is directly adjacent to this project. And I just want to say that I got on this call really concerned because, of course, a 5-story condo unit in my backyard is kind of shocking, but I see that you have worked very hard to take in all of our concerns and do the best that you can. The building's nice looking, and with all the greenery around, it does mitigate, some of the visual. I'm not certain which one of these is the south side, which is going to be facing me. So will you point out which one of these images is the south?
No problem, Deborah. It's
that it right there.
Here. Yes.
And so those trees that you have right there look like redwood trees, which cover the building beautifully. But as was just discussed, they're not going to be redwood trees, is my understanding. do we know what trees those are going to be?
Those are columnar red maples. They're going to have a beautiful fall foliage. So if you looked out the window right now, they'd be glowing red. They tend to grow more upward as opposed to outward. So we have a couple of them placed just strategically in that spot, not to just to provide you with that buffer, but the residents that are going to move into this building.
Absolutely. And so they're not going to be vertical and like they are in this image. They're going to spread out a little bit more, right? And they're deciduous. So they're going to drop their leaves during the winter time.
That's right. That would promote light gain and heat gain from the fact that we'd be putting them at that frontage.
Okay, another, and then, so obviously my big concerns are the noise and light pollution and privacy. You addressed the, the lighting with the windows, but what about the actual lighting? I'm sure that you took that into consideration and are figuring out ways to have the illumination go down or against the walls instead of out into the sky and the public.
Yes, we were very conscious to select light fixtures, which facing your side of the building would be very minimal. There basically would be, a code required fixture at these patio doors, and then some very modest safety path lighting down at the ground level, but everything was picked to be very not upward glowing, shielded fixtures. We were required by the city to do a photometric plan so that we could ensure there was not a lot of light leakage onto adjacent properties. So we were trying to be very conscious of being modest with the lighting plan.
So to summarize, especially on the south elevation, the only lighting that's at upper floors is on those balconies where some lighting is necessary, and that is down lighting.
Right.
And where's the elevator shaft in this? Is it on the east side? Is that where that is?
So you wouldn't even see it from this side. So this would be the front of the building, which is facing east, facing Rich Avenue. So this is where the elevator tower is. So it's tucked away behind the units that are facing you.
And then which way is traffic coming in and out of the
traffic?
This problem. My biggest concern would be like any kind, like garbage, because they will be coming in and out, and and then any kind of emergency vehicles, which probably is not a constant like it will be with the senior residents on El Monte. But so which way is that going to be coming?
So coming down, so I'm going to flip back and forth a little bit. So here's Rich Avenue, and site access would be right off of Rich Avenue, in and out. And then if I go back to this plan, the trash room is actually in the basement of the building, and on trash days, the bins would be pulled out to a trash staging area right here, so that trucks would come off of Rich Avenue, pull in, grab the bins, pull out, and go back out down Rich Avenue.
Okay, so they won't be, so they'll be closer to Rich Avenue and not all the way onto the property, which is okay.
Correct.
Okay. I guess my only other comment would be those trees that are in the spring and summer and the fall that will be providing a nice block. If there's a way to make it, I don't know if you could get some evergreen in there at all. Otherwise, I throw my hands up to progress. Thank you for considering us neighbors who've been here for so long and are used to a very different living environment.
Well, we appreciated all of the community's comments, and we really think that incorporating your concerns and staff's feedback has pushed the project to a very nice place. So I'm happy to hear that you're you're more pleased. I know, I know 5-story building is still, wouldn't be your first choice, but I'm happy to hear that you feel there's progress.
Yes, I do. And if there's any way to address the deciduous trees, like maybe a couple deciduous and maybe a couple of evergreens to just have some kind of a screen year round. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, let me jump in there. That's a fantastic point, and we did think about that. The 3 taller trees are the columnar maples. Wrapping around the rest of that building are Swan Hill olives, which are evergreen, and then we have a large feature oak that we're trying to get in right in the beginning, right in the front. So we are trying to mix them so that way this isn't a leafless project at select times. So we are trying to mix that, and that's a great point that we were thinking of.
That's great. Even at the higher levels that I'll be seeing every day.
Actually, everything up there are evergreens from a tree standpoint.
Great.
Thank you. I see that Carlos has rejoined us. So Carlos, I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk. Please keep it short as we are running late on time today. You should be able to talk now, Carlos. But you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm a field representative for Carpenters Local Union 405, and I'm here talking about labor standards. And labor standards stand for healthcare, apprenticeship, and livable wages. When it comes to healthcare, do you know that nearly 50% of California construction workers rely on some form of public assistance? Also, 1 out of 4 construction workers in California lack health insurance. That is 2.5 times the rate for all California workers. When it comes to apprenticeship, construction apprenticeship programs are a proven escalator to the middle class, training tens of thousands of California residents every year at no cost to taxpayers. And because of the increased wages and lack of student debt, construction apprenticeship can be a better option than a traditional undergraduate program for many young people. When it comes to livable wages, the need of a livable wage that allows workers and their families to live in the communities that they work in, and this also means those wages will go back into our community as they spend their earnings, and their tax dollars will keep help funding our local schools and government. With that in mind, we have reached out to the developer for this project and have not heard from them yet. And we would like to know what kind of labor standards this project is going to have. We are open to talk. Thanks.
Thank you, Carlos. I'm gonna ask that you take that conversation offline, not just for the fact that we are running short on time today, but this body is not involved in formal permit recommendations or actions on this project. We're a design review committee providing recommendations purely on site design and architecture. So it's well outside the purview of this committee and our deliberations today, but appreciate your feedback and understand that this is a major area of concern. So with that, I'm going to bring it back to the panel for discussion today. I'll just start with a brief thanks to Cynthia for running us through in good detail the challenges that you face with the site, as well as the work that you've done to try to address the community feedback you've heard. I am also heartened to hear from a neighbor here today that I think, as you put it, it may not be their first choice to see a 5-story building here, but that they at least have noted progress made in trying to address the feedback that they shared with you earlier in the process. And I am confident that will continue to be your focus moving forward. So thank you. I think we will start out. This is the first review today, and as you noted, we're looking forward to providing feedback that helps you carry the project forward and continue to refine the design. So I think we're just going to briefly touch on a few site and landscape design related elements. And I'll also apologize in advance. I meant to sort of refresh my memory of your tree planting plan before DRC today, but didn't have a chance to do that. So I will take any comments I make on that today with a grain of salt, and please feel free to correct me if I am not remembering correctly. You know, we know that this is a really tight site, and there are certain locations where you can't place trees and taller landscaping because of things like the EVA and the easements that you referenced. So definitely note the progress you've made so far. There were maybe 1 or 2 locations that we wanted you to consider evaluating, either adding a tree or looking at an opportunity to beef up the scale of the tree. The main one that caught our eye, and I'm speaking for you, Linda, here, was this area in that corner. One of the things I've observed, just anecdotally to monologue a little further, in projects is, you know, certainly having trees that block views can be really beneficial, but the other thing that taller trees do is just, even if they're not immediately blocking a view, proximity to the building and incorporation into a site just helps give something that's natural and scales the building. So you see something that has sort of height of its own that kind of stands up to the building, but is maybe sometimes a little bit more pleasing to look at. So even if it's not a location that's closer to the building, you know, along that southerly edge that you have, you know, seeing if there are opportunities to add higher canopy trees or add trees that have scale, or maybe, you know, tweaking the planter configurations to, you know, say add something even around here that is a little bit beefier. Be creative still. I know you've done a lot of work already to improve the tree planting plan, but we want to encourage you to continue to be creative and sort of look at this plan and see what further opportunities you can find to modify the planting plan in a way that gives you a greater mix of higher canopy trees, and including sort of the feedback you heard from your neighbor today about, you know, as we move around the building, sort of seeding in a mixture of tree types that provide different resources to the project over the course of the year. The one lighting related comment that we wanted to provide for you today is, you know, in general, this is a fairly sort of low lit, sort of security focused project. Staff did indicate that there are a few locations where you've identified some pole lighting. And I would say if it's not necessary for you to have some taller pole lighting for other security purposes, we generally recommend maybe more frequent sort of bollard height or pedestrian scaled lights in lieu of those poles, just because even with some of those screens, they don't always really sort of block sort of visibility of the bulbs from off-site. So avoiding the issue by just incorporating shorter lighting is generally recommended. You've got a lot going on towards the front of the site, and I applaud the effort to add a larger canopy tree there. There are a couple of things that I think could add to sort of a softer entry drive condition, and a sort of a separate technical area of concern that I observed when I double checked your utility plan today. So I'll start with the easier recommendation, which is to consider, you know, alternate paving details for the entry drive, something that feels a little bit less sort of standard road and a little bit upgraded can go a long way. I would say maybe at minimum for that beginning stretch before there's a dog leg, but I know there are a lot of options out there. So study what you think will work well, while obviously also being a drivable surface for service and EVA vehicles. In looking at your utility plan, I'm a little bit concerned about the ability to provide much in the way of landscaping in that area on the left side of the driveway. You've got, you know, two backflow preventers and your DCDA that are congregated there. And ordinarily, sort of concentration of utilities can be great, but I think you're going to find that when you add in sort of buffers and access and things like that, you're not going to get much in the way of plant screening there. So I know that generally speaking, the hardest things to move further from the property line are your water services. I would ask that you work with staff, including the fire department, to see if it's possible maybe to push in DCBA to another location or further into the site, just to open up more opportunity to have actual landscaping along that portion of the entry drive. I think the other thing to study, I'm not sure, I know that you received fire department comments about the Grass Creek proposal in that entry plaza area, but what are the other materials that you were looking at using there?
They're pavers as well.
Okay, pavers. So I mean, one of the things maybe to consider with the entry drive is something that picks up on the paver patterning at that entry. And then, you know, gosh, I'm sad to lose Grass Creek, but I would encourage you to see what you can sort of, you know, negotiate with our fire department staff that meets their load requirements, but is something maybe a little bit softer than just a 26-foot wide you know, set of pavers. It'd be nice to have something a little bit softer there. But I know you may have some limitations, but just I would encourage you to be sort of dogged and work with Aki and seeing what sort of options you might be able to work out.
Yeah, I would, Rebecca, one thing I would mention is that on the other project that we reviewed today, they also had some turf block on their drawings, and that project is a lot further along. So maybe Aki could look into that, because if that project, as far along as it is, has turf block, there may be something that is acceptable to the fire department.
Yeah, and I think we saw a little bit of success with the memory care project, actually adjacent with some alternate configurations, but I do know that our fire staff are very particular about what they might consider and how it's laid out. So it's a offline conversation to have, but
right.
Encourage you to work collaboratively through Aki with our fire staff to see what you can come up with.
Yeah.
And that actually wraps up our site related comments. I think, you know, like you said, it's a tough site to crack. And I think you've made a lot of progress in addressing the earlier feedback you received from staff in the community. So I think the comments today are really about refining what you've been able to achieve so far, and taking it just a little bit further along. That jumps us to the building design, and I think we're going to start out bigger picture, and I think really what many of our comments and recommendations today are, maybe let me take a step back. I think, you know, we're well aware of the feedback that you receive from your neighbors with concerns about privacy and the scale of the building. And I think from an overall massing perspective, we sort of generally support the strategies that you've implemented to try to scale down and sort of reduce the visibility of the upper floors. I think, you know, the challenging thing as a design review body is sort of trying to reconcile a lot of those privacy concerns and in some ways actually the bulk concerns, because the design solutions for each sometimes run counter to each other. So like a building with like less window to wall area is gonna look chunkier, and because it's sort of, there's less openness, there's more solid wall area. And so we kind of went back and forth with thoughts and recommendations on how you might kind of further create sort of a lighter and airier building while also addressing privacy concerns. And I'm saying this a little bit for folks in the audience to understand that you know, that it can be a real design challenge to try to come up with solutions that balance a lot of sometimes competing objectives. And that's a wordy, but I think hopefully beneficial sort of prelude to you know, the things we want to chat with you today about, because there are still some elements of the building that are feeling a little kind of chunky or clunky to us. And so we're going to kind of highlight a few of the areas and ideas that we had that we think might be either the reasons we're having that response and sort of areas to study as potential solutions to the issue. So I guess, do you have a view maybe of the building that shows us the building from the southeast, or sorry, the northeast corner of the site? Yeah, could you zoom in on that maybe upper left? Rendering. So I think that there's a few things that we observed that were like really legible in the design, and sort of what we saw in the building is that you have this recessive body of the building that is the stucco element, and then sort of reading proud are these Prodema siding clad elements. But one of the areas that caught our attention as sort of being awkward to that are these side elevations where you're sort of pulling it through. Could you speak a little bit to how the material transitions on the north elevation to the stucco fourth floor?
Yeah, I know what you're getting at here, and pulling it through as opposed to, say, stopping it was initially the thought to try to emphasize that 3-story base and introduce that language to this side of the building where it's otherwise continuous. The strategy here was that, you know, it's no secret, these two walls on the 2 floors are in alignment. So the thinking was to play with molding, so to speak, using the Prodema material to provide some relief at that transition, so that at least when you step back, you kind of read that mass, that 4-story mass as broken up, and having that material wrap around the corner from the front. So that was the strategy.
Okay, so there is some sort of like cap detail that you're thinking there.
Right. So just like how at the top of all the cement plaster walls, we wanted to introduce this kind of trim molding detail. Thought to mimic that at the top of the wood as well, whether the material stops and it doesn't continue on, or it's a transition. So we thought it could serve dual purpose, where it kind of finished off the caps, but also provided a little bit of relief at the transition.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is that those two materials are really in the same plane, and it doesn't work as well there as on what I'm going to say is the front, where there is a difference in the plane. So that's one of our big concerns, is that condition.
Yep.
Ordinarily, we'd expect to see that 4th floor in set.
Hold back.
I think one thing to look at in further detail is, you know, if there is any opportunity to create something of a plane change there, but to look a little bit further at what that transition detail looks like. And I think part of our noticing really how much it's in plane is that that cap detail isn't really super legible in the the proportions of the wall, and so there it may call for something different. The other thing that that came to mind also is the Perdima product, and I'm not seeing Bruce England in our audience anymore, is actually a natural wood product. It's kind of the best of many worlds, in that it is a real wood veneer on a sort of a substrate that addresses a lot of constructability issues for developers. So it is going to have a great appearance. But because, at least as you're showing in your photo example on the material board, it has a very sort of, you're showing a very clean sort of edge to edge installation. It has a very similar kind of planar condition to the stucco walls. So we wanted to encourage you to look at an alternate installation details for the Perdima siding product that give a little bit more shadow and relief and contrast to the stucco wall areas of the building, because we think that's going to help it stand out and be more effective in the conditions in which you're proposing it to be used. We did sort of some quick searching online and found some really interesting applications. So would encourage you to look into that. And also just to look at other things like what happens with the Perdima at corners and things like that sort of all add up to sort of adding character and shadow and relief to the building. So
I think also something we we wanted to mention, and as this moves through the review process, the renderings, I think, unfortunately do a disservice to that Perdima product, because the renderings make it look very stripy, and it won't look like that. So I think you need to really really scrub the renderings so that they're reflecting what that product really looks like, and maybe include some examples of installations of photographs that everyone can understand what it's really going to look like, because it is not going to look stripy like this. So I think that's very important. It's a high quality product, and it needs to be shown that way so people understand what it is. I think my my other comment regarding that is, as you move forward and start getting your cost estimates together, et cetera, that again, if that product changes, sometimes things get substituted as you get into the real budgeting for the project. And this is such an important aspect of the success of this design that we would have to be kept informed, and staff would definitely have to understand what your potentials are, that if that material changes from the quality level of the Perdima, then that's going to have a big impact to the aesthetics and the ongoing aesthetics of the project over time as it ages. So that's a really important aspect that we need to. I just wanted to be sure we mentioned that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because
you're yeah.
Go for it, Linda. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say your design relies on that material being excellent in appearance and and very consistent in its finish, and so that it doesn't look like fake wood siding. At any rate, I just wanted to really emphasize that it's very key to the quality appearance. And while I'm talking about the renderings for a moment, also that the other thing that the renderings appear to show, which like some clarification on this, is that those stucco joints are showing up very strong, as if they're going to be large, deep joints. And I'm not sure that's helping the appearance of the building. So I think that needs to be something that you really figure out, if the stucco joints are indeed going to be just a regular narrow joint, then the building is going to look different. And you might want to emphasize some of the joints and de-emphasize some of the other joints. So if that can also get clarified, my concern about the appearance right now is that all of those joints being so dark and what would probably be very wide joints makes it look too busy. And so again, on your detailing on this is going to be really important.
Yeah, the other thing that we just remarked on, and this was something that staff brought up, is the renderings also don't really sort of give a clear sense for what your actual proposal is with the Bach Modern railings. Our observation from the renderings is that they felt kind of dark and heavy, and we know that the actual proposal is more kind of brownie in the bronze family. Which doesn't come through in these drawings, and they also do look very, very closed off. So the effect is a bit heavier than we would usually want for this sort of feature, because the balconies often really help to highlight wall movement, and sort of when they have such a solid appearance of their own, that can sort of have a counter effect. So we'd like you to study options for that railing design that give maybe a slightly an airier appearance, a lighter appearance, while also still being responsive to the community feedback that you've received. And maybe it does mean that the screening at the upper floor terrace is something that's a little bit different than what you're using on the railings. On the balconies themselves, since the terrace might see a little bit more concentrated activity than these individual decks, but we want you to study options for that.
Well, I think also that again, the product, that Bach Modern product, is another very high-end material, and they have a lot of different patterns and almost vine looking, or more of an informal arrangement of the punched holes, and it can still create, it can allow for more privacy for the neighbors or from the residents, but it is more interesting and it feels lighter. There's certainly a lot of different patterns that they have available. So and I will I'll also say the same thing that I said about the siding, is that the Bach Modern product is quite expensive and will look really beautiful. But you do need to select the right pattern, and in addition to that, ensure that that is the product that you're actually going to be able to afford for the project, because that's the balconies and those railings are a prominent feature on this building and on this design. So I think that has to really be taken into account.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think, I've seen a lot of projects be able to incorporate the Bach Modern, and I don't know if they have different ranges that are available that address affordability. I think, the other thing that I've observed is, the Bach Modern, I think they all want you to buy their products, but also can be sort of inspirational. And there are a lot of different ways to procure materials, particularly metal railing type materials for projects from a variety of sources. So I think the overall feedback for you is obviously, the project that we review needs to, as Linda noted, sort of be the project and sort of feature the things that you're indicating are your part of design. So make sure that that to the extent feasible, and I know there are a lot of variables that only really quantifiable later. But it's something that you think you can reasonably construct. But you understand that we also know that there are a variety of ways you can sort of maintain the design quality while sourcing from other entities. So we look forward to what you come up with there. We also wanted to talk a little bit more about kind of the 4th and 5th floor massing. Broadly, we support your approach, as I mentioned earlier, of stepping in the 4th and or 5th floors at these, particularly the side elevations or the more the elevations that are more visible to the residential adjacencies. There are a few things that we'd like you to kind of further evaluate. First, on this south elevation is you have kind of a really nice, simple, orderly approach to your articulation around the building, but then things get a little bit weird on this south side. So we thought there might be some further areas of kind of simplifying the approach on this facade in a way that just will make it a little bit quieter, and with the idea being that it might be a little bit less eye-catching from afar. So our experience is that kind of variability tends to draw the eye. So one of the things that we saw was this kind of variable is you've got this kind of like zigzag to your balconies, and so we would encourage you to kind of look at options that kind of simplify and align. So like maybe the balconies kind of get a right edge that falls into play, and maybe like the 3rd and 4th floor balconies kind of have a complementary appearance. So there's like a little bit of that busyness happening in the background on the facade. Kind of related only to the fact that it's in view right now. I think one of the things that was effective when pulling the corner with the Prodema product at this southwest corner is that you do actually have a little bit of plane change here. And so I know you've got a little less room to play with, but we did wonder if, for example, at that northwest corner where you're actually not proposing to wrap the Prodema, whether there might be some ability, for example, to pull that 2-story element kind of around with a little bit of relief to do something similar to what you have going on that south facade. You might not be able to do the same for this element here, but we were kind of noticing the planar condition of that northwest corner, and thought that the other elevation that you have might give you some opportunities that you could apply there. We also, in some ways, your 5th floor reminded us a little bit of, when someone retrofits like a factory building and adds like a penthouse floor to it. And there are sort of a variety of approaches there. I think sometimes when we have stepped back upper floors, when that upper floor has like a real solidity to it, or is sometimes it's also that it's too tall, but kind of like the more solid and sort of blocky it is, sometimes even though it's inset, it still is really eye-catching. I know you've reduced window sizes to try to address community concerns, but would encourage you to continue to look at opportunities that might make that upper floor, particularly the 5th floor, kind of do a weird mix of fitting into the design a little bit more, but also lightening or making it a little bit less boxy, so that to the extent that people are seeing it, they feel happy to see it. One of the ideas, because very often one approach would be, okay, let's kind of like create a greenhouse on a roof style, and that might not be feasible given the privacy concerns, but perhaps on, say, like the west elevation, even though there might be concerns with solar gain, there might be opportunities to create some larger windows towards the memory care site. Would ask you to study if there is any sort of alternate roof line that could work on that 5th floor. That would be something that it would be actually very similar to what we were remarking on in the prior project. If you could do some studies and share them with staff, sort of talk through the pros and cons and come back with a final proposal to DRC and sort of show us the work, that would be really beneficial. The last thing is, we don't think it's necessary for that 5th floor to have a completely different color. I think having a similar color to the building below will help it feel a little bit more cohesive. The massing is doing the bulk of the work for you. So in some ways, giving it an alternate color is making it stand out a little bit more. And I think probably one of the last areas of the building that we wanted to talk about was this sort of entry stair and condition. Yeah. So this was an area where we recognize, I think, that what you were trying to do was to in combination with addressing community feedback, you were trying to do something distinctive that highlighted the entry, but it also felt like the one area of the site where your design diagram broke down a little bit, because we would have kind of diagrammatically expected this sort of stucco to read through, rather than getting this material. And I think we understand the why, but when we were looking at it in elevation view, one of the thoughts we had was, what would make a lot of sense as far as highlighting the entry and integrating the stair, which I think are the two objectives that we have for this area of the building, is what needs to relate to each other. And the thought was that what needs to relate to each other is this and this. And then kind of this volume is maybe something that fits into the building and is quiet behind it, would be one approach. And if that approach is workable, then this overhang maybe goes away. But particularly given that you have not a lot of window area on the stair itself, as you noted before, one of the things we thought might be worth studying is, instead of a perforated panel accent element appearing in this background face, is maybe that's the thing that gets applied with sort of a standoff, so you get some sort of shadow and pattern and effect that is sort of carried through and accents the sort of the stair and entry together. We understood exactly what you were trying to achieve. I think we just were not finding it as effective in actually achieving those objectives of, again, trying to emphasize the entry and integrate the stair into an entry feature.
Okay.
One thing that we, one thing that we discussed in our briefing was the stair tower. If my analogy was, if this were a commercial building, an office building, we would say, make that stair tower glass, make it transparent, make it a focal point, something that is, because it is a large mass, it's tall. and it steps up even further back towards the elevator overrun, and so it could be a real feature element. But we understand that the input you got from the public was that they didn't want to see this stair. They didn't want to see people going up and down the stair and all of that, and they were concerned about it. So I think that area in general with that form, as Rebecca said, that look at the material on that wall. And again, from this view, it's interesting seeing how those windows at the corner, you know, jump up and down. And gosh, if that whole element at the very corner had a different color, a different feeling, so that it doesn't read as a bunch of little punched openings in the corner. So I think that there is a lot to be done with this general area, how you emphasize the entrance, how you make that separation between the mass of the building wing to this anchor of the stair tower, and then back to a building wing again. It's a key, it's like a hinge or a knuckle that needs to have some study as to how it becomes an important anchor for the building, but doesn't conflict with the concerns that the neighbors express. I think that's going to be one of your big challenges, is that whole section of the building.
Yeah, and to be clear, I think what I had noted as like a potential different application of the metal perforated panel, or a metal perforated panel, is just one option. I think we agree that sort of some sort of special treatment makes sense, and sort of diagrammatically we were thinking about what the correct relationships might be given the rest of the sort of the design of the project was. And so we wanted to kind of highlight that design thinking for the entry, but there could be several other options as far as sort of how you apply those concepts, whether it's a perforated metal panel. Some more and more buildings are including mural type things as well. Like, there can be sort of fins and projections. There are lots of options that are out there, and we'd encourage you to think about what those options might be that feel like they'd be appropriate to this site, and then sort of apply them in a way that like links the features that we want to emphasize, like the ground floor entry, and the things that are going to be prominent because they're a prominent mass in a way to highlight the entry. So I think that wraps up the bulk of our building comments today. I'm going to touch on just a few detailed things, and often we sort of save the detailed things for the later DRC reviews. But we observed on some elevations that these sort of trellis sunshades you have on the balconies, like on some elevations and on some balconies, the sunshade kind of matches the width of the balcony, and then there are other locations like here where they seem to just be matching the doors themselves. It seems to us that the more effective option would be to kind of match the balconies, but wanted to note that so we'd observed that variability. We weren't sure if it was purposeful, if there was something else going on, but so matching the balcony width sort of does two things. It gives sort of shading to the full width of the balcony, which is nice for usability, particularly on certain elevations, and also just I think has a stronger scalar impact. Yeah, I think we talked about how there's a lot of really great character, detail, and materiality in the project. So I think as we move towards the sort of the final DRC and eventual public hearings, making sure it's rendered correctly, we want to sell the wonderful things in the project and not have the plans sort of short sell the things that you're proposing. So just keep that in mind. I know typically people will produce higher quality renderings for the public hearings, and we don't need that to happen early in the process, only to have to update them later, but bear that in mind. Eventually, when you come back to the DRC, we'll want to have sort of a full complement of schematic details for things. So, you know, make sure that you're giving us, you know, window details for, you know, windows on each type of wall, particularly if there'll be differences between, for instance, the Pradima versus cement plaster walls. You know, give us material call outs for things like the, you know, the balcony soffits and fascia. You heard us, I think, talk about that in the last project. And then, you know, we talked a little bit about how the siding can provide more sort of texture and shadow. I think you've got a pretty good starting point as far as your window treatments are concerned, but as you continue to refine the design, I would just, you know, continue to think about how, you know, your window trim details sort of contribute to the overall effect on the building. There's not something, any sort of specific problem I would call out now, but it's just something to keep an eye on as the project continues to refine and you're developing those details for us to talk about at the second DRC. And I think that's it. Aki or Linda, do you have anything else on your sort of your
I think
notes or
there was, yeah, I just, you know, in looking at, you know, the orientation that on the, again, in trying to add more interest to that east facade, you have a lot more trellises, there's a lot more going on there. So you have a lot of these trellises and sunshades on the side that doesn't really need them. So I think that what you might want to do as you're looking at your design is to
oh no, we lost Linda, you chopped out for a
practical.
second there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Just trying to get high sun exposure elevations of west and south.
Okay, you got choppy again, but I think if I can channel Linda from other meetings, your recommendation was just to pay close attention to the shading device needs of the elevations that are have the greatest exposure and potential need for those shading devices.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that wraps things up for today. Thank you for, you know, again, for the work you've done to get to today, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with Aki, who I know is new to you, but she's fantastic, and she sits just a couple desks away from me. So if she needs to chat with me about any of the progress work that you do, I'm in within easy reach, and he's not shy. So
Great. Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. So with that, I'm going to thank everyone in the audience who stuck around to the end, and I will adjourn this meeting of the DRC. Thank you, everyone. Stay well.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.